Alright, I have a confession to make. This low-key might put me on fraud watch as a DC fan. Over the years, I've become accustomed to a multitude of DC TV shows, whether it be the Arrowverse shows on the CW like Arrow, The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow. I pretty much stopped watching those shows altogether after Crisis on Infinite Earths, as I regularly kept up with those shows here and there up until that point. I've also grown fond of some of the non-CW live-action shows like Gotham or Stargirl before Stargirl ended up becoming a part of the established Arrowverse multiverse. You may or may not have noticed that whenever I talk about a character or a set of characters across media and specific adaptations they've had over the years, I never really talk about Smallville and how that show depicts some of the characters from DC Comics lore. There's a reason for that. Before these past few months, not once have I seen a single episode of Smallville.
You are a worthless bitch ass nigga. Your life literally.
I know, but hear me out. By the time I got into these shows, Smallville had already ended, and the way I'd usually catch up with seasons, say I missed a season of The Flash or something, I would watch it on Netflix. That's how I got into shows like Supergirl and so on when they were airing. But to my knowledge, Smallville was never on Netflix, so the opportunity to watch the show never presented itself to me at that time. It was always on Hulu. The idea of watching Smallville never really came up for the longest time. It's not that I didn't want to watch it, it just was never on my radar. Then a few months back, I randomly thought to myself, wait a minute, I've actually never seen Smallville. That's kind of weird. So I got myself a little Hulu subscription and binged all the seasons of Smallville. And after taking the time to actually watch the series in full, I can say with confidence that Smallville just isn't a good DC show. It's a goddamn fantastic DC show. What, you really thought I would sit here for however many minutes and talk trash about Goatville?
You're out of your goddamn mind.
I probably don't need to do this, but I thought I'd give a heads up anyway on spoilers because I'm going to be spoiling like the entire show. Smallville's pilot aired before I was even born, so if for whatever reason you haven't seen it, I mean, the show is mad long. 10 seasons of television amounting to 217 episodes in total, each 40 plus minutes in length. Smallville has got to be the longest running DC TV show ever, airing from 2001 to 2011. But the journey was definitely worth it. Brother, I was locked in while watching the series. That intro music is majestic. I didn't skip it once while watching the series. I think that's the shonen anime watcher in me. Listen to that joint 217 times. Nothing on this planet will ever make me forget it. Only way to get it out of my head is to make me go through some electroshock therapy the way Lionel did Lex in that one episode. I think what works best in Smallville is the focus on its core cast of characters, where you're invested in the arcs that are a part of due to how they're written and not just because of the IP the show's connected to. How in the world did you make me like Lex Luthor of all people for a brief period? Obviously his downfall was inevitable, but you could tell that Lex was just trying to do the best he could while being scrutinized for the actions of his father Lionel Luthor. It makes Lex's descent into evil all the more tragic because him and Clark had such a strong bond and dynamic where they were almost like brothers.
Lex, do you ever miss not having a sibling?
I used to, until I met you, Clark. You're closer to me than any blood brother.
You see that mistrust build up over time, with Clark constantly having to keep his abilities a secret to those around him, including Lex, coinciding with Lex's desire for power and partaking in shadier practices as time goes on. Their entire dynamic was pretty much like,
and you just let that shit happen? You were supposed to be my brother. You think I ain't your brother? Man, fuck you. I'm out.
For the longest time, I would hear people praise Michael Rosenbaum's performance as Lex Luthor, saying he's the best live-action interpretation. I never doubted those people or thought they were just glazing him or anything, but since I hadn't seen the show yet, I had no strong thoughts on that take. Yeah, I completely understand gassing him up after watching this.
Oh my God. I get it.
His turn wasn't one of those things that just happens for no reason or is rushed. You see how being raised by Lionel Luthor affected him, along with constantly being blamed for his father's actions, toppled by Clark constantly keeping secrets. I think it was the Lexmas episode that solidified Lex's quest for power, and he deemed it a necessity in order to survive, as he went through a dream sequence where him and Lana Lang were happy together. Lana was pregnant, but she had complications during childbirth. Lex asks his father for help, but his father refuses. refuses, resulting in Lana's death in this dream world. My dislike for Lex as a character really manifested in season 6, which is a good thing as I disliked him more in a sense of, oh, I can't believe you did this, rather than disliking how he was written, meaning the writers did their job well. That's when they started pushing the whole Lex and Lana relationship, which I wasn't the biggest fan of. It came to a point where I'm sitting there on my computer screen praying on Lex's downfall, talking about some Smallville writers. I want you to kill Lex Luthor. Little did I know my wish would eventually be granted. Speaking of Lana Lang, I don't know what the general consensus is on Lana, but I feel as if she's one of those characters that overstayed their welcome throughout the course of the series. Now don't get me wrong, you will never see me complain about seeing more Kristen Krewick on screen. I mean, good lord.
Lord Jesus.
Clark Kent, I think I understand where you're coming from.
You know, a lot of actors will say, it's just work. There's nothing there. Bullshit. If Kristen Kreuk, one of the most beautiful women in the world, is playing this character and coming on to you, it doesn't get old. I don't care who you are, folks.
If she showed up at the Luthor mansion, Lex would be like, let's do one more, guys. One more take, please. One more take.
But you as your character had to confront that. Like, she was doing that in front of you a little bit.
She did a little bit.
The whole whipped cream thing.
Yes, and I remember specifically when she was whispering in my ear, I was just like, oh, oh, Lord, stop that. I really had to be in character. I really had to straighten it out.
I genuinely thought we wouldn't see more of her character once Clark graduated from high school. It got to a point where they would do this constant back and forth, will they, won't they, since Clark refuses to reveal his secret to Lana. Oh, she's in a relationship with Whitney, but then he died in combat. Clark and Lana start dating, then they break up. Then they get back together, then they break up. Now she's dating Jensen Ackles. They break up, and Lana gets back with Clark. They break up again, and now she marries Lex Luthor for some reason. Then she gets back with Clark. Then she leaves the show, comes back for a little bit, then leaves again. It's like, what are we doing here? It painted a clear picture they had no idea what to do with her in season 8 when she temporarily gets powers. I remember just sitting there thinking,
oh, for real? On God? Just like that.
Like, we know she's not the end-all be-all for Clark. Lois Lane is right there. At some point, I'm like, Clark, why are you so infatuated with this woman? It's not gonna work out, gang. The relationship between Lex and Lana was just outright despicable, because the entire purpose of this pairing seemed to hurt Clark after he dumped Lana, as Clark thought being together would put her in danger. Lex had been infatuated with Lana even while she was with Clark. Then, when him and Lana get married, Lana finds out Lex had been secretly injecting her with hormones to make her believe she was pregnant just so that she could stay with him. Diabolical behavior if I've ever seen it. Lana's about to leave him, but Lex says he can't just let her walk away. As evil as Lex can be, there's no way he would hit the woman he claims to love so much and marry. Out of all the notable DC heroes that show up sporadically throughout the course of the series, whether it be Aquaman, Impulse, Zatanna, Martian Manhunter, with some only appearing in a few episodes here and there, Green Arrow has got to be my favorite out of the bunch. Once he became a series regular, Oliver Queen honestly became one of my favorite characters in the whole show. Hot take, I think Smallville has a much more faithful adaptation of Oliver Queen than the Arrowverse. Justin Hartley's performance is a lot more in line with what you'd expect from a young Oliver and how he interacts with Clark Kent and the rest of the cast. I think the somewhat grounded nature of the show, or as grounded as you can get when you implement so many sci-fi elements, allows for the more fantastical side of DC Comics lore to shine and stand out. This is obviously just a product of its time, but I find it hilarious that a lot of the heroes use jackets as the base of their suits. You've got Dr. Fate with the mystical helmet of Naboo summoning his suit via magic, and it's just funny seeing the costume with a zipper, but the design of the suit is surprisingly not that bad. Out of nowhere in the beginning of season 9, Clark just wears a black trench coat when roaming around as the Blur. Then Zod and the rest of the Kandorians do the same thing once they get powers of their own. Watchtower, which is basically just a clock tower, served as a base of operations for the costumed heroes, which was operated by Clark's longtime best friend, Chloe. Chloe Sullivan is an interesting case because I was sort of okay with her in the first couple of seasons. The love triangle between her, Lana, and Clark wasn't really all that interesting when they were in high school. She could get a little annoying at times, but I think she was well handled by the the time they all graduated from Smallville High. Chloe was essentially Clark's guy in the chair, or his oracle in a sense, after she found out about Clark's abilities. It eventually got to a point where she became super intelligent and a computer tech whiz in the later seasons, operating Watchtower for the other heroes out in the field. However, in season 8, it seems as if Chloe lost all of her brain cells despite how intelligent she's supposed to be. Season 8 focused on Davis Bloom, or Doomsday, as the main threat, as the writers took more of a Bruce Banner Hulk approach, with Doomsday being this inner monster Davis Bloom can't control. He was basically a science experiment manifested by Zod on Krypton. The combined DNA of Zod himself, his wife, and other Kryptonian warriors created Doomsday with the sole purpose of destruction and killing Clark when he was sent to Earth. Around the same time, Chloe and Jimmy Olsen rekindled their relationship and ended up getting married. However, Davis Bloom served as an EMT and developed feelings of his own for Chloe, and it got to a point where Davis could only control his Doomsday persona when he's around Chloe. So Chloe gets the bright idea to stay with Davis at all times without telling Clark or Oliver Queen like a moron. Oliver's like, yo, we need to kill this guy, but Clark refuses and thinks they should take an alternative route. So Clark gets the bright idea to send Davis Bloom / Doomsday to the Phantom Zone so that he can't cause any more harm. I'd say that's the best of both worlds, right? He doesn't have to kill Davis while simultaneously making sure he can't harm anyone else. As he's ready to send him to the Phantom Zone, Chloe goes to the fortress to stop Clark. You may be asking, why would Chloe do this? I'm glad you asked, because I cannot give you a concrete answer other than the fact that she was just being really idiotic throughout the course of the season. She states that Clark wouldn't be able to live with himself and is indeed saving him, even though Clark has no intention of killing Davis and wants to send him to the Phantom Zone. Mind you, this man Davis is a serial killer who can't control his actions as Doomsday, and to be honest, killing him wouldn't even be all that inhumane, because not only is he not human, he's a fabricated science experiment from Krypton who thought he was human up until much later in the season. You don't want Clark to kill Doomsday, but then you go out of your way to prevent him from sending Doomsday into the Phantom Zone?
That is totally retarded.
To make matters even worse, Chloe's own husband, Jimmy Olsen, caught onto Davis's antics before anyone else, but she didn't believe Jimmy and thought he was going crazy after he was attacked by Doomsday at their own wedding. Then near the end, when Clark uses black kryptonite to separate Doomsday and Davis Bloom, Davis kills Jimmy, and Chloe has the audacity to say that Jimmy's death is both her fault and Clark's.
He didn't deserve to die, Clark. He died because you and I screwed up. Because we made a mistake.
We? Now we going to war. What do you mean we? Nintendo? No, nigga, we as in us. Us? Are you talking about the movie? No, nigga, us.
Chloe, Jimmy's death is completely your fault. Oliver wanted to kill Davis. Clark thought it was too much and said it would be better to send him to the Phantom Zone. You prevented Clark from sending him to the zone, resulting in the deaths of countless innocent lives, Oliver and Jimmy getting kidnapped, Oliver nearly getting killed by Davis, followed by Jimmy actually dying in your arms because you didn't allow Davis to be dealt with earlier. She really thought it would be better to stay with him at all times so he could never turn into Doomsday. Oh, don't worry, he cares for me and won't turn when I'm around him. Okay, what happens if something happens to you then? You have to be around him 24/7 just so he won't turn. How could you possibly think that's a good idea? One of my initial concerns was the use of the Freak of the Week format, where each episode would introduce a new superpowered individual, often related to the meteor shower, to challenge Clark. I could see how it laid the foundations for future DC CW shows like The Flash, where the show had weekly metahuman villains thanks to the particle accelerator. Thankfully, the writers were smart enough to not abuse the formula, as later on they would focus more on interconnected story arcs, and it would eventually get to a point where if they do have an antagonist with abilities, they're either metahuman or got their powers from somewhere else unrelated to kryptonite. I think it's definitely not as prominent after Clark graduates high school, but some of these encounters with the meteor infected would bring about important lessons Clark would learn that would establish the man he would become in the future. Smallville holds the crown for the best depiction of Jonathan and Martha Kent, right? Very rarely do you have stories nowadays where both parents are important figures in a character's life, where they're both good people and the dad isn't like a deadbeat or a bumbling idiot. You understand that Clark isn't some righteous hero just because of his abilities, but it's also due to him being raised by the Kents. He wouldn't be the man we know he will become without their guidance. Honestly, can't imagine someone holding the belief that Clark Kent or Superman is a boring character after watching Smallville. A character's death would be bound to hit harder on a TV show over a movie, since you spend more time with said character over the course of several seasons. seasons. Smallville is one of the only instances in media where Jonathan Kent's death actually hits hard like a ton of bricks. Like, that scene did not feel good at all. As for Miss Lois Lane herself, does Smallville have the best on-screen Lois Lane and Lois dynamic?
Possibly.
I mean, it's a top contender for sure. It's crazy how both Superman shows that aired on the CW, that being Smallville and Superman and Lois, both nailed the Clark and Lois relationship. The positives of being a TV series is that you get to see connections develop. To me, it never felt forced or rushed. It made it even more frustrating when Lana Lang came back for a little bit in season 8 during Chloe and Jimmy's wedding. It's like, yeah, the Clark and Lois agenda is finally moving. Things are going along quite well.
No way. I can't believe it.
What the fuck, y'all? God damn! God damn!
One thing I did kind of find odd is how Lois and Clark are set to get married in the penultimate episode of the series, but their wedding gets interrupted thanks to Apocalypse heading towards Earth and Oliver temporarily being corrupted by Darkseid. They don't decide to get married for another 7 years after the time jump during the very last scene of the show. I guess it was to match up with the timeline scene in the source material to some degree. The quality of the show may have dropped just a little bit after season 7 because that's when Michael Rosenbaum left the show and his presence was kind of missed. I think the only season I really wasn't a fan of entirely was season 9, which centered on General Zod and the Kandorians. That's by far the weakest major plotline to me anyway. Although I really like what they did with Checkmate and how they introduced some members of the JSA. I didn't mind this series finale, but I feel like there were elements that were very underwhelming. Darkseid's defeat was incredibly anticlimactic and abrupt. Clark learns to fly after like a decade, rushes through him, and then he's just gone. Then Clark just pushes Apocalypse out of the way, I guess, as it heads towards Earth. I hated how they killed off Tess Mercer as she was really starting to grow on me. I know it's for the sake of maintaining the status quo so that Lex Luthor and Superman can become proper enemies in the future, but I feel like it was kind of a cop-out that Tess just put some black ink on Lex's face so that he would forget about Clark Kent. Because before Lex's death, he found out about Clark being Kryptonian and being named Kal-El and whatnot. Then Oliver Queen blew him up in a truck, but Lex had a bunch of his clones in the making at Cadmus Labs with all of his memories. It also begs the question as to why Tess didn't just use the ink on Lionel Luthor from the parallel Earth in the beginning, since he was the one who wanted to bring back Lex from the dead. They literally erased 7 seasons worth of Lex Luthor's character arc. I also thought they would have banded all the heroes together that were established throughout the course of the show to defeat Darkseid, since the show puts so much emphasis on how Darkseid would be the greatest threat Clark's ever faced. Although the John Williams theme playing in the final scene as Clark's ready to take off I thought was pretty cool. I had mentioned in a previous video that the cameo in the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover event on the CW didn't make much sense to me for Clark Kent's character, especially taking into account the Smallville continuity and all the trials and tribulations Clark went through to become Superman. You see an older Clark Kent who settled down with Lois Lane at the Kent farm as he's confronted by the Arrowverse Lex Luthor, and you find out that Clark gave up his powers to live a normal life.
It's kryptonite, which has no effect on me ever since I gave up my powers. That is worth more than any superpower.
Now, at the time, I hadn't finished Smallville yet, and I would see people in the comments of the clip of Clark's cameo say, "Oh wow, this makes so much sense for Clark's character." Or even in that multiverse video I made where I talk about the scene, I saw this one comment saying how the cameo was really great because there are other heroes to defend Smallville in his absence.
Nigga, no.
After watching every single episode of Smallville, it honestly just makes the cameo scene even worse. All that effort in emphasizing Clark Kent's destiny and becoming the greatest hero on Earth. Additionally, it contradicts with the show's timeline, because characters from the future like Booster Gold or the Legion of Superheroes would rave about Clark's efforts as a hero and what he represents. There's also the vision of his future accomplishments, seen by Dr. Fate. I mean, hell, Lois in the final season almost decided not to marry Clark because she thought him being around her would prevent Clark from saving countless lives, and Lois thinking she would just serve as a distraction from completing his destiny. Don't get me wrong, there have been moments in the show where Clark wishes he could be normal and not have any innate abilities, but he generally gets rid of that mindset once he's out of high school, and by the time he reaches adulthood, he fully understands the importance in becoming the hero he's destined to be. The show ain't perfect, it has its ups and downs, CGI doesn't hold up by today's standards, but all in all, it's a banger show. I enjoy enjoyed my time seeing Clark Kent grow as a character, taking into account the experiences learned from his parents as well as his vigilante allies later down the road. Without a doubt, one of the best portrayals of Clark Kent in live action. It captures the human element of the Superman mythos, which is something you can't fumble when adapting the character, because if you do, well then we're gonna have some problems. Also, put the show on Netflix. I would have watched Smallville years ago if it was on that app. One of the other streaming services like Max or something needs to have a bunch of Superman shows and movies on there as sort of a binge collection to build hype for the Superman movie next year. I'd like to imagine there's still a strong fan base for the show after all these years. Recently, I've been enjoying the Talkville podcast with Michael Rosenbaum and Tom Welling, where they rewatch all episodes weekly and do discussions on each episode, occasionally bringing on guests who starred in the series. Kind of poetic how the first live action CW DC show was Smallville, and the last one that will air will be the 4th and final season of Superman and Lois. An era of DC TV really started it and will end with Superman. But before I hop out with the video, just remember,
always hold on to Smallville.